Hey guys, welcome back to my YouTube channel, and this video is going to be a follow-up of my X-T20 unboxing video that I made a couple of months ago. And I just wanted to give you my experience with this little camera when I took it overseas. So we've just come back from a trip to Southeast Asia where we went to Hong Kong and Taiwan for 3 weeks, and we left all our expensive Sony gear at home and just brought this X-T20 with the kit 18 to 55 millimeter lens, 2.8 to 4 f4, and this flash, and that's all we took. And I just wanted to talk to you guys about the experience that I had when I was overseas and whether this camera, in my opinion, is good enough to serve the purpose of being a travel camera and allowing us to leave our big, heavy, expensive cameras at home. Well, to sum it up, in most situations I found that this camera was more than adequate, and having used it for a good 3 weeks on the road constantly every day, I can tell you that there are some really good things about it and there are some not so very good things about it. And after you've heard what I've had to say, you can make your own decision as to whether you think this is the right gear for you to take next time you go abroad. Now, let me preface everything by saying that if you are specifically on a photographic trip, I wouldn't be taking this combination of camera with me because it just lacks some of the, specific things that you would require. But if you're on a trip with your family, this, as I said, for 95% of the case, it's more than enough to do what you want it to do. Now, in terms of the construction of the camera, I just want to make a couple of comments. It feels very sturdy in the hand, and it still always did that whilst I was on the trip. But there's just a few quirks I wanted to talk to you about. Number one is being quite small in the back. When you try and hold it with reasonably big hands, I found that quite often you're accidentally pressing one of these buttons here on the side. And if you have the AF setting on your touch screen, it's not very difficult to accidentally press the one shot and actually take pictures of the ground, and you'll get a couple of those, but I guess it's not such a big deal. The touchscreen actually is quite responsive, and it works particularly well for auto-focusing when you've taken the metering off the wide focus. So that's one good benefit of it. Some of the other quirks I found was that, as I may have said in the last video, that with a lens that has an aperture ring like this one here, you cannot use the dials, the front or the back one here, to adjust the aperture. You have to use the aperture ring, which is just something you get used to. I found that the shutter dial, the shutter speed dial here, a little bit mediocre. You can do the settings and you can set the dials to adjust the shutter speed, but you can only use it to, as far as I can tell anyway, to set it in between the numbers on the dial. So if you want 1/320th of a second, you could set it at 250 or 500 and use the dial to alter it. But if you had this thing set on 250 and you wanted to alter it to, 30, you can't do it with the dial, which I think is a little bit of a hassle. Some of the other things that I found was just a little bit off was that this compartment, this battery compartment thing, it's really easy to open by accident, and by good management or good fortune, never got to the situation where I either lost the battery or lost the memory card, but just bear that in mind. And as I said, it's a pretty rugged construction. I brought this flash with me, which worked very well because I've never been someone who uses the poppy-uppy flash, which I would never use on this camera anyway. But one thing I found here was that the locking mechanism isn't quite so good. So when you take it off lock and you put that on, you actually have to, even once you put it on lock, you can feel there's a lot of turn, there's a lot of give, and that's one of the things. And you actually have to be really conscious to push it in all the way, otherwise the end contacts don't touch and you don't actually get control of the flash. So that's something to bear in mind. But it is very sort of flimsy in terms of the hot shoe, and it's much more flimsy compared to the Sony cameras. Can this camera be capable of taking the kind of shots that my Sony A7 III, which I brought the last trip, with the 16-35 f2.8 Canon adapted lens and the Sony size 55 1.8? Well, the answer is almost all of the time you get reasonably good video picture quality. Obviously, with the kit lens, you don't get wide apertures like with the other lenses, like you don't get 1.8, 1.4 and stuff like that. But to be honest with you, you don't tend to use that very much when you're on vacation, especially when you're taking pictures of people. You actually want people to be able to see what the background is. So having a blurry mess in the back might be good for a portrait session. It's not so good when you're trying to show off the building, the Taj Mahal, the Eiffel Tower behind you, because you want to be able to see that. So I had no issues shooting at f4 or f5.6 from that point of view. And in terms of low light performance, it's pretty good. You can easily use it with ISOs up to 1600. You get a little bit of noise, but it's pretty decent, and I don't think that you would have any issues. And you can also always use some of the noise reduction capabilities of Lightroom to fix that. Obviously, I shot in RAW, so you do get a lot of latitude with the post-processing of the images here, and they are very decent files, and I would certainly have, as I said, no qualms in recommending that camera for that sort of purpose. Some of the other little quirky things that I found was that tracking motion with the AFC, which is the continuous autofocus, is pretty rubbish on this camera. You're never going to get kids running around and get decent pictures. You're not going to get animals, pets and stuff like that. I don't think that this is, at least it's not going to be the right lens body combination for you. But anything that's static, I think it works really well. It's much lighter, and one of the benefits of being so light is that most days you don't get back to the hotel room with an achy back like you would with a bigger combination. You also you'll find it much easier to fit this camera in a non-dedicated camera bag, and also it's cheaper, it's less weighty and less bulky. So they're all advantages and benefits of having a camera like this on your trip. One other thing that I wanted to mention before I forget is, for some reason, it could once again just be me, but shooting in manual with the flash on manual as well, the live view doesn't really reflect what happens when you add the extra light with the flash. So basically you're composing the images with the live view in the dark, and when you press the shutter button, you take the photo, it comes out as you would normally, but you don't actually get that flash effect. As I said, I don't know if it's just me, and I'll look into that, but that's kind of a little bit of a nuisance. For someone who is reasonably experienced with photography and shoots on manual, you can sort of compromise and adapt to a lot of these things. But if you're someone who just wants to be able to get the camera and take the shots, there are just a few things to keep in mind. Video on this thing so far is pretty good, and basically all I've been doing is switching it over to the video mode and putting it on auto, and it seems to be doing quite well, and I seem to be getting really good video with that. But I will look into that a bit more. Didn't use this for a lot of video when I was overseas. In terms of other things, obviously this lens combination is not suitable. For example, we went to the zoo in Taipei, and it was pretty much of a waste of time there because no one would normally take an 18-55 to the zoo anyway. The bigger lenses will probably serve you quite well, as long as I said, that there wasn't going to be any issues with the autofocus continued tracking. Eye focus on this thing, certainly, a distant second to the great eye focus that you get with the Sony cameras. That's just so awesome. When you shoot weddings and you're shooting brides at apertures of 1.4, 1.8, the ability for the camera to just focus and isolate one eye is awesome, and you don't get that with this camera. But then again, you're paying 4 times less for this camera than you are with the Sony. So I think that that's a compromise that you're going to need to accept, and it's something that you need to be aware of. Any other things is that the battery life on this is pretty good, and I've never had to use more than 2 batteries on any single day, whether you're just walking around the sea or going for a trip. I brought 4 batteries with me, and that was perfectly adequate. It takes a little bit of time to charge the batteries, so I'd be sure to charge them every night when I get back to the hotel room. And in terms of, I didn't use the Wi-Fi function, so I don't know how efficient that was going to be to transfer photos directly to your tablet or your phone. But I had no issues taking the SD card out, putting it into an SD adapter and plugging into my wife's MacBook, and the photos came out, of pretty good quality. If you go to my blog, which is at www.derekchaimedia.com, in the blog section, I've written a little bit more detailed about my experience with this camera and lens and flash combination while I was overseas. And one of the things that you'll find on the blog too is I posted a couple of photo examples, so it gives you an idea of how capable this camera is when you go overseas, and I think you'll be pretty happy with it. As I said, there are a couple of quirks which, as long as you're happy to accept them, I think it'll be fine. And I've also said in the blog that on a perspective level, if you gave the Sony a7 III 16-35 and 55-1.8 combo a 10 out of 10 in terms of performance, I'd give this Fuji X-T20 with 18-55 combo probably 7 out of 10. So not bad. Certainly not so good in terms of the really pro stuff, but you're not going to really be buying it for that. And as I said, the compromise or the sacrifice of that little bit of image quality is made up for by the fact that this setup is so much cheaper and so much more portable. Just one last thing is that, unfortunately, when I went on the trip, the black rapid strap on the hot shoe, not the hot shoe, but on the tripod, actually fell off, and this camera actually decided to do a suicide dive onto the floor at Hong Kong airport. And this is a second flash because the first one completely died, everything broke, cracked and everything, but that was my fault. So I'm gathering that most cameras, that if you dropped it from waist height onto a hard surface, it'll probably break. And I think that the fracture point was in the flash, which was good because the camera wasn't damaged, to my relief. But I just had to scurry around Hong Kong trying to find a replacement flash. And just to let you know that these suckers, this EF X500 is not very easy to find in Hong Kong right now. It is about $50 cheaper than you would get it for in Australia, but I had to actually go to Mong Kok, to one of the Broadway camera stores in Mong Kok, and that was the only place that we could find in the whole of Hong Kong and Kowloon that actually had this flash in stock. So that was a little bit lucky, but my bad, it was me dropping the flash, so there's no one else to blame for that. So if you enjoyed this video, or if you want to ask any questions or have any comments, please write in the comment section below on this video. Give it a thumbs up if you like it, and I look forward to bringing you the next video. And check out my website and my blog. As I said, I've uploaded a few images so that you can see for yourself, and it's certainly worth it for a crop sensor camera, which is probably $1,500, $2,000 with the flash. I think it's a pretty reasonable travel combination as long as you can accept the shortcomings. And just go out there and shoot, and you'll get to know what you're actually after and what you actually need in terms of equipment, rather than spending on your money buying stuff that may not be necessary for you. But in the meantime, just as I said, just go out and have fun, and I'll speak to you soon about something new with photography and anything electrical. So catch you guys later.